Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. Season 5 premiere of Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Season 5, Anton Paras.
We have a return guest, a veteran of the podcast at this point, making his season premiere debut, though. Nathan Perry, welcome back to Why Wasn't It Better?
Pleasure to be here. Is this my 5th appearance? Does it round out to 5? Is this exactly as, planned?
Sure, man.
Sure.
I can assure you it was absolutely planned like that.
Okay, yeah. All right, perfect. Well, I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you as always, because you are something of an anime expert, and we are covering a anime-ish film for our season premiere.
Nathan, I want to get you a shirt now that says anime expert.
Anime expert or anime-ish? I feel like both of them are good shirts.
We could make both for the podcast and sell them as merch.
Ooh, anime expert. Love it.
Yeah. Because I wouldn't call this film anime. It's anime-ish, anime-esque.
Anime adjacent.
Yeah, it's adjacent's a good word for it, because it's trying to be an anime film, but of course it's not, because it's live action.
Anime light.
Yeah.
Well, it's also, in fairness, it is trying to adapt something rather than we're not just talking about a live action film that we're like, man, this really seemed very anime. It's clearly, but in its adjacent or esqueness, it's because it's like leaving behind the anime to put in non-anime.
It's esqueness. I like that. Yeah, it's no On Her Majesty's Secret Service, that's for sure. It's no Speed Racer.
Ooh. Yes, it's not. No, this is definitely trying to inject less anime into an anime. Very intentionally, I think.
That's correct. Anton, as far as admin goes, we have the Patreon.
Yes, we do. Hope you're excited, folks.
Yeah, Nathan, we have a Patreon.
This is my first time hearing about it. It's already up?
It is. We haven't yet, as of this recording, we haven't yet published the tiers, but that will be forthcoming. By the time the listeners hear this episode, the tiers will be published and it will be fully operational.
Oh, man. Any previews on the tier? Nothing? Or it's just got to wait for it?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a preview. It's like it's going to be $1 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. There's going to be some early access. There's going to be some Patreon exclusive episodes. At least that's the direction we're leaning in. You know, we haven't fully ironed it all out yet, but it's not going to be astronomically expensive. Nothing about our current format or release schedule is going to change. Listeners can still expect to hear weekly releases of the podcast, you know. So as far as that goes, it will be uninterrupted. But we intend the Patreon to just offer a little bit of a bonus to our most dedicated listeners.
I love it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do with it.
Yeah, we have some ideas. Like I said, by the time this comes out, it'll be all figured out. And then, of course, Anton, we have a TikTok.
We do have a TikTok, as much as I will admit I'm not a fan of TikTok.
I don't know anything about it, but I do know that our kind producer, Eric Taylor, has offered to, manage as much of that side as he can, which we're very appreciative of.
You guys getting into the memes and stuff on the TikTok, trying to relate to the kids?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
We are sellouts.
Look, I won't disguise the fact I don't know a lot about it. I've never actually used it. I'm going to have to quickly become an expert, at least until it gets banned in the United States, which I keep hearing about.
Yeah, they've been saying that for a while. Yet, where is it?
They have, yeah. I'll believe that when I see it.
Yes.
You have been on the show. This is your 5th appearance, and it's the 5th season, which was 100% deliberate and planned.
Yes. And here we are talking
We
about
are Ghost in the Shell, the 2017 live action version. Nathan, this is the second anime-inspired film that we've covered. You were, of course, here for the first one, way back in season 2. Or was that season 1, Anton?
That was season 2.
Okay, so but a while ago, would you say, when we talked about Death Note?
Yeah.
All three of us pretty much hated it. We gave it a failing grade across the board, which is pretty rare on this podcast, where both the hosts and the guest give something an F. I think it might be the only occurrence of it.
Fail across the board. I mean, did we get to that with Lord of the Rings?
Oh, we did. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that was pretty awful. Still, pretty rare. And I think one of the things, Nathan, that we talked about on that episode was how unsuccessful Hollywood has been at live action adaptations of anime.
Yes.
There's simply not many examples of that either. We have a list that we're going to go over later, but, Ghost in the Shell, it actually came out the same year as Death Note, so we got 2 failures for the price of 1.
Yeah.
Because one of them was technically quote unquote free because it was a Netflix release, whereas this one was in the theater. If you wanted to see it, you actually had to go to a physical location and pay money to see it. And you did. You did see it in the theater.
Saw it in the theater in 2017.
Wow.
Dang.
Did you, Anton?
I did see it in theaters. I'm enough of a nerd that I actually have it's somewhere over here, but I have a collector's patch that they gave away at Comic-Con as a bit of a tie-in for the movie.
Wow. Have you tried selling that on eBay? Do you know what you can fetch for it?
I tried selling it on eBay, and then I actually owed people money.
It's like I tried to get rid of it.
It's still here. It's here somewhere. And if I find it, I'll definitely, maybe we'll post it on Patreon. Whoever claims it can just have it.
We're just going to give it away. Well,
in the near future, Major is the first of her kind, a human who is cyber-enhanced to be a perfect soldier devoted to stopping the world's most dangerous criminals. When terrorism reaches a new level that includes the ability to hack into people's minds and control them, Major is uniquely qualified to stop it. As she prepares to face a new enemy, Major discovers that her life was stolen instead of saved, and now she will stop at nothing to recover her past while punishing those who did this to her. Released on March 16th, 2017 by Paramount Pictures, Amblin Partners, DreamWorks, ARAD Productions, Reliance Entertainment, and Stephen Paul Productions. Directed by Rupert Sanders. Screenplay by Jamie Moss, William Wheeler, and Aaron Kruger, based on the manga by Masamune Shiro. Starring Scarlett Johansson, Beat Takeshi Kitano, Michael Pitt, Pilu Asbæk, Shin Han, and Juliette Binoche. With a budget of $110 million, so $136 million adjusted for inflation, that's a box office of $169 million, $210 million adjused for inflation.
Nathan, as this week's guest, why did you want to talk about Ghost in the Shell?
Well, one, it's something we talked about all the way back, I think, at Death Note. I actually don't remember if we talked about it on the episode or immediately afterwards, but it was an equal kind of flavor thing, right? We talked about, I think, in that one, like, what is with adaptations of anime as live action adaptations of anime? Do they work? Do they not work? Can you do them? They keep trying them. Are they successful? And what's that space look like? And I thought it was definitely interesting to look at what's maybe one of the most highest budget. I guess, I don't know if we have a comparative budget. I don't know if something like Speed Racer or something had more money thrown at it, but this is definitely comparatively higher budget film than, say, Death Note, right? And, a bit more glamour, and is just, I don't know.
Yes.
It's interesting to continue the conversation of Hollywood keeps adapting anime, and how's it going? Let's check in on it. So let's check in on this one. And I remembered it being a movie that was not immediately offensive, like, say, Death Note was. So it seemed like a good one to have a conversation about.
You're absolutely right. We did talk about it on that episode. And I think you may be right. This may be the highest budget ever given to an anime adaptation in Hollywood. $110 million is quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking at the time it made sense because Ghost in the Shell was by no means an obscure anime, right? Much like Death Note, it was pretty famous. It was probably a name that even non-anime fans would have recognized. You
Sure.
know, especially when it came out, even back in the 90s, even as a kid, I remember like hearing about Ghost in the Shell. I don't think I saw the anime film, which came out in 1995, until several years later. I don't remember exactly when I saw it, probably sometime around the early 2000s.
Hmm.
But of course, I had at least heard of it, and I knew how influential it was. I knew how popular it was.
Hmm.
I'm obviously going to continue, just like on Death Note, to use anime as a blanket term to cover manga as well for simplicity's sake. I don't want to keep switching between the two.
Yeah.
You know, while this series did start off as a manga, I would imagine most American audiences are probably most familiar with the 1995 film. Would you agree?
Um,
Yes.
I'd say the 95 film, though I do think there's a lot of people that, and I know it's in your notes and you're probably just about to get there, are also familiar with the television show.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
the
actually the first thing I saw. I don't I should have mentioned that a bit earlier.
It was
I
also the
think I
first thing
saw
I
Standalone Complex before I saw the 95 film.
same here. I don't think I saw the 95 film. There's probably like a slice of people, maybe 10, 7 to 10 years older than us that would have seen the 95 film more than the standalone complex. I think we come in at that's kind of the thing that we
Right.
might be more familiar with.
have either of you guys seen the manga or read the manga?
No.
Nope.
Yeah, no, it's very different from the film.
That's what I've heard for sure. Anton, you probably have a better historical memory for this kind of stuff. I think the 95 film was the first, it was one of, if not the first anime films to become a big hit in the United States. I know it actually got a theater release in the US, I think.
Well, a film earlier, of course, is Akira, and that was
Right.
a pretty big hit in the US. I mean, still not like
1988.
yeah, still not huge, but definitely Ghost in the Shell made a very big impact, especially from in the sci-fi scene.
Yeah. You know, the cyberpunk of it all. I know it was enormously influential on The Matrix, but I think like you, Nathan, I got into this series because I saw Ghost in the Shell standalone complex on Cartoon Network. I think I was in high school at the time, and I ended up seeing the sequel to that, like which was like Solid State Society. That was a great follow up, and of course, like every major anime, rumors about a Hollywood adaptation had been circling for years, and we finally got one in 2017. Both of you saw this in the theaters, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
I did not. I don't know why I didn't see it. I forget when Death Note came out. It might have been after this, but I remember them coming out like kind of around the same time in 2017. And I saw Death Note on Netflix, or at least I started watching it, and I was so turned off by it that I just did not get around seeing this for a couple of years.
Sure.
And of course, this got a lot of press when it came out. There was a lot of negative hype, unfortunately, because of Scarlett Johansson being cast as the Major. There was the criticism about whitewashing even before the film's release. However hyped it may have been, most people did not seem to care for the end result because this lost the studios anywhere between 60 and 100 million dollars. It's one of the biggest box office bombs of all time.
Sheesh.
Yeah, the budget that Anton listed, of course, does not include the marketing campaign. So
Mhm.
it's even worse than it looks on paper.
Right.
Um, I don't think I expected this to be good, but we're going to get into this discussion more in depth as we get into this episode. But like, I am always going to be interested in seeing how Hollywood tries to adapt anime. Kind of like what we talked about on Death Note. I don't want them to give up. I don't think it's a waste of time. I
Yeah,
think eventually they will crack the code and they will get it right.
I mean, I think they've done it right.
Eh, On this film?
No, Battle Angel Alita.
Yes, that's correct. I would agree with that. But that's one example of how
It's
many.
yeah, out of too many really bad examples.
It's safe to say they don't have a great batting average.
Yes.
And I have a list of the actual the adaptations that they've tried, which we'll get into a little bit later. But gentlemen, anything to add before we get into the production history of this? Any initial thoughts you want to get out?
Just wanted to mention late 80s, early 90s anime in general in the US was very, how should I say, It was very particular in the fact that distribution was not always representative of all anime. So whenever there was actual distribution or localization of anime, whether it be cyberpunk style films or even just fantasy films coming into the US, oftentimes a lot of the more infamous titles that really got a lot of distribution were they called it pretty, gory films or pretty gruesome anime films that kind of drove a lot of attention to them, which was a lot of the association with anime in the late 80s and the early 90s. Ghost in the Shell, of course, released in the mid 90s, so it's still kind of attached to that, but it's just kind of funny thinking about perception of anime even then was still it's still very much considered it from that subgenre of, whoa, we kind of see it associated with this very particular kind of medium being released from Japan. So just some food for thought.
I'm actually very curious, pinging off of that, Anton. Do you want to say food for thought in terms of thinking about the 95 film and what the
Yeah,
95 film brings? And then because this film is so much in reference to that 95 film, like what is this film then doing in terms of borrowing, mixing, changing up, reusing things from the 95 film?
if the 95 film showed US audiences that anime is able to take very serious topics and nuanced topics and present it in like a very artistic form, it was able to step away from that original perception from the late 80s and 90s. And I'm talking about,
I see.
if you
Gotcha.
think it, like, look it up sometime, there's just like a lot of anime from then was just very hyper violent. Things like Xenocyber, Mad Bull, MD Geist. Just look up a few
Mhm.
of those, and it's just like this was a very different anime. This was a very different era of anime in distribution in the US.
Okay. That's definitely, I think, a good thing to think about because, yeah, I think the 95 film is something that, as much as we may want to, you kind of want to keep in your mind when talking about this one because there's so much that it's playing off and playing against.
Yeah, and
Um,
if we're always going to be kind of comparing it to the original source material, it's what did Ghost in the Shell 95 do for anime versus what did Ghost in the Shell 2017 end up kind of taking a few steps back for anime?
that's interesting. That's interesting for
Oh,
sure.
I can't wait to hear more on that. All right, production history. Going back to 2008, DreamWorks, who had handled the American theatrical distribution for Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence, and Steven Spielberg. Of course, Spielberg was co-owner of DreamWorks at the time. They acquired the rights to produce a live-action film adaptation of the original manga. Before we even continue, man, I wish Steven Spielberg had just done this. I think we all do. It's like, geez, that's just so tempting.
It's tempting, but even then I'm like, I don't know if he could do it right.
Would have been better than this. I'm willing to bet on that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Avi Arad, we know him, and Stephen Paul were later confirmed as producers, with Jamie Moss set to write the screenplay. Leda Kalogridis later replaced Moss as writer. The project seemed to be destined for development hell until early 2014 when it was announced that Rupert Sanders had been hired to direct the film, based on a new screenplay, this one written by William Wheeler. I could not find any solid information as to why Spielberg dropped out and Rupert Sanders took over. Anton, were you able to dig anything up on this?
No, I was not. No,
I
no dirt, but I'm sure it probably wasn't pretty.
No, man, I really wish there was, sometimes doing the research, there's just black holes, and this is one of them. I would have really loved to find out why Spielberg dropped out. If any of our listeners know, please write in and tell us, because this is a really interesting what if. So back to this guy, William Wheeler. He worked on the screenplay for a year and a half, later saying that at least 6 or 7 other writers had contributed as well, although ultimately credit for the screenplay was given to only 3 individuals: Wheeler, Moss, and Aaron Kruger. Paramount Pictures then entered the picture as co-financiers. Margot Robbie was initially in talks for the lead role, but it was confirmed that she chose to play Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad, so Scarlett Johansson was offered the role with a $10 million salary.
Which makes sense from a studio standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. This was the middle of her, MCU fame. Makes total sense that she would be offered this role.
In April 2016, the full cast was officially announced, including Juliette Binoche, Chin Han, Lazarus Couture, and Kaori Momoy. Johansson filmed this in between her work on 2 Marvel projects, Captain America Civil War and Avengers Infinity War. The character Dr. Ouellette was originally written as a male character, but was rewritten as a female to accommodate Juliette Binoche, who impressed the filmmakers at her audition. Filming lasted in New Zealand from February to June 2016. Additional shoots also took place in different areas of Hong Kong. The film was originally to be released by Disney via their Touchstone Pictures banner, but after their deal with DreamWorks expired, distribution rights were entirely shifted to Paramount. The film was not screened for critics prior to its release, which is usually a red flag, and it ended up with a 43% Rotten Tomato score. With an official $110 million budget and an undisclosed amount spent on marketing, the film grossed $169 million worldwide. It lost somewhere between $60 to $100 million, and as we mentioned in the intro, one of the biggest box office flops of its era. So, with that, let's dive right into it. What is the first reason why Ghost in the Shell wasn't better?
But first, Anton, let's take a quick break as we hear from one of our sponsors.
Boom.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. And we're back. Before we get into the discussion, trivia question for both of you. This film contains an Academy Award-winning actor. Do you know who it is?
Is it Beat Catano?
No.
No, I don't know. Did they have the Academy Award before or after this film?
Well before.
Nope.
Juliette Binoche won Best Supporting Actress for The English Patient.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is a film that we will be covering on this podcast, Anton. Eventually. Nathan, you a big English Patient fan?
Huge English Patient fan. I've definitely have heard that title before now.
Okay. I'm like non-sarcastically asking, knowing that I might get a sarcastic answer. I actually am a huge fan of that film. I think it's an excellent film.
Yeah, I've never actually heard of it.
The reason why I want to do it on the podcast is it's now routinely included on the list of like worst Best Picture winners. I'm like, that sounds like something that's perfect for Why Wasn't It Better?
That does, yeah. That's definitely fits your guys's fits this podcast to a T. So one of the best worst picture winners. Interesting.
And it's a great cast too.
Yeah, it's got a great cast.
You're looking it up now?
I'm looking up now. This is a great cast.
Great movie. Don't understand the criticism about like the worst Best Picture winner. Like, what does that mean?
Is it just that it's not like, oh my gosh, amazing?
I don't know. I honestly don't know why it's included on that list. It just seems like one of those movies where it came out, it got a huge amount of critical acclaim. It won like 9 Academy Awards. And then for whatever reason, there's been a backlash against it. I never understood it.
Maybe it
sounds like you just talked yourself onto that episode, Nathan.
Just fine. Oh my gosh. I'm on. So,
I don't think the Seinfeld episode helped. There was a Seinfeld episode called The English Patient.
Oh, okay. I don't remember when I've seen all of Seinfeld. But if I don't have the context of this film, then that would go over my head.
It's pretty funny. It's actually a play on what we're talking about, where everyone in the episode is talking about how great it was, and Elaine just hates it.
Oh, okay. I'd have to go rewatch it. Maybe I'll watch The English Patient and then watch the Seinfeld episode. We can talk about both.
Ooh, I'm down. All right.
We're a little off track, though.
A little bit, but it's all in good fun. Okay. Why wasn't it better, Anton? Let's start with the whitewashing.
Okay.
Take it away, Anton.
So it's a film that's set or the original film, of course, Japanese. And I think it's always important for us to kind of consider as anime fans, how much are we willing to accept change while being able to kind of respect the source material? So considering that, why did they think that having a transracial storyline was going to do great for Ghost in the Shell in 2017?
I think we can understand why they cast Scarlett Johansson, one of the biggest movie stars in the world at the time. She still is. You want to sell tickets. It makes sense to cast a super famous actor in the lead role. That's obvious.
I mean, it is. But at the same time, it shows me just how narrow-minded studios can be in terms of looking at foreign source material and not trusting being able to put in actors that actors or casts that really fit the description from the source material. Why not have a Japanese cast? Why not cast strong actors of that descent? But of course, I can see it's because we have the huge marketing dollars to be able to draw in a wider audience for this, maybe for this genre that probably isn't as visible to a wider audience.
Right.
And then, of course, had they done an all Japanese cast, right, then it opens the discussion, is the film better off being filmed in Japanese, or do you do it in English? Anton, we talked about this sort of recently with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny, where it's like, okay, it's a sequel to a movie that was filmed in, was it Mandarin or Cantonese? It was Mandarin?
It was Mandarin.
Right, okay. Same point that we're trying to make, though, right? The original film was in Mandarin. They make the sequel, but they film it in English, despite the fact that it has a mostly Asian cast.
But the weirdest thing about this film to me is, okay, if you're going to just cast, if you're going to just cast white people, or kind of really inject a bit less color into the casting, why then just sprinkle in all of these, I guess, Asian iconography? It kind of makes you feel like you're in, like, it's still basically in the setting of a very future neo-punk, cyberpunk Asian aesthetic, but at the same time everyone's white. So I feel like it was just using these Japanese and Asian qualities as just decoration.
Right. Not everyone was white, though.
No, not everyone.
No. You had one character who spoke Japanese, which was confusing. Everybody else spoke English. This is not the first time I'm going to bring that up, because it really bugged me.
Do you recognize that actor, by the way?
I wanted to jump in and say that even though you got almost no time with them as individual characters, they tried to have the Section 9 in this film be a little bit of a multicultural mixing pot. Again, there's some interpretations, I think, you can see some gesturing in this film towards, having a slightly different setting for it to be something that's caring about, how should I say, like clash between different cultures coming into contact with each other. There's references to things like refugees, and it makes a gesture towards, we're doing this because we're kind of doing our own maybe innovation or change on the setting. And I think that, to go to the thing that you said at the top of this section, Anton, there is something in play whenever you want to adapt. And there's something where, you can maybe play with that if you have something interesting to say with it. But I can't say this film is trying to do something interesting with it. And instead they fight themselves so hard that they try to walk it entirely back at the end of the movie for some reason.
Now, look, I agree with you there. I just think it's a missed opportunity. I mean, why even set this in a very multicultural setting, or show that it's in this cyber future multicultural setting, and at the same time not help reinforce that by having a character that was famously Asian in the source material, just reinforce that by having her still be Asian? I mean, it just baffles me.
All it did was remind you that Major should be Japanese.
And also, I'm just going to call BS on things that I've read online around, well, to be fair, Major's body is a shell. She's not actually any ethnicity. She's actually just she's just more robot than human. But it's important to note, right, in the original source material, her Asian heritage was an important aspect of her identity. So, yeah.
And that's also, I think, even pointing to source material, even the 95 film, the 95 film has a lot of discussion about, the politics. Even I remember the opening scroll talks about how, this collision of technology hasn't yet affected, state power such that there's still state actors. I mean, part of that 95 movie is about a coordination between a secret project between the Japanese and Americans, and this whole thing that doesn't really exist here in this story, right? Where maybe it could be something interesting. Maybe it could be an interesting thing if that's consistent within the film itself, right? You know what I mean? You could actually double down on that and maybe have something interesting to say about it, right? but it's also not. It's also way too loaded and scared of engaging that as a actual point of conversation.
Yes.
Right? Like at no point does it like its usage of like there's maybe a point where if it just was completely blind to it and said I don't care about it, maybe it'd be like fine. But yeah, there's a important part of this movie where the last like act seems to be about the fact that even if they don't say explicitly, oh, she was actually like a Japanese girl and now is in a like kind of and now is Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, no, it's if the original film was about nuance and existentialism and more uh being able to engage those topics in a scholarly way, funny enough with anime, then this film was actually just more about a character trying to figure out their past.
Yeah.
Nothing, not really touching on those same nuanced topics.
Another thing about it that bugged me. So they go out of their way to try to address the whitewashing by explaining her like being reprogrammed as a non-Japanese person, right? And that's where the whole like shell things comes into play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But they have other characters in the film like Batu or Kuze, whose name was Hideo, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But they're not played by Japanese actors either. So it's like, is she the only character in the film who's supposed to be experiencing this weird racial reprogramming thing that they try to awkwardly address? It's like, because you have a bunch of other characters played by non Japanese actors in the film, but you also have the chief who is played by a Japanese actor. And the whole thing is just confusing to me. Why are they singling her character out for this type of identity, but no one else is?
I see it as because they want to still kind of address some sort of nuanced storyline around this concept of identity, but because the film focuses more on the action and the
Mhm.
storyline in her past, they don't really address it in a way that should give it more attention or more depth, and it ends up just falling really flat.
Yeah, I think like so much other, Japanese or whatever in this film, it feels like it's a choice made for aesthetics and to be like, hey, did you know this is based on a Japanese anime? Like, which is such a large but that's where it's like on the one hand it seems totally consistent with every time they had like a Shiba Inu dog on like a picture or something. Like, did you know it's Japanese? Oh, did you know like
Yeah, there was a
but it
there
seems
was
like
an
kind of a big thing to have that it's like, really, guys, is this just an aesthetic choice because you want to have everyone know that you're linked into the fact it's Japanese? Because this seems like really awkward.
Well, yes, I do think that they wanted to just keep reminding audiences that fact. There's the really famous scene in particular where Major and Scarlett Johansson's character in the original anime and in the live action, they do this a lot where they take the famous scenes and just kind of recreate it shot by shot. This particular scene, Major just, takes off her suit and then just like jumps backwards out the building and then just kind of is falling down the side of the building. Remember that shot,
Mhm.
guys?
Oh, yeah.
In the original anime, beautiful shot. It's you have the depth of the actual city. You don't
Mm-hmm.
know what she's doing. She just jumps and it's just again beautifully shot and you see the vastness and just the precision of her character. You see the same shot in Ghost in the Shell 2017 and I immediately was like, why did they have 3D koi fish on the side of the building? It's just again just a reminder, oh, by the way, did you know that the source material was Japanese and this is a multicultural background?
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's like it's multicultural, but we're also going to constantly be focusing and referencing almost entirely that this is based on a Japanese series. And did you
And
know?
just in case that isn't enough, as a backup plan, we're going to have one character speak Japanese the entire time.
Do you recognize that dude, Pat?
I do.
For
He's
our
not been in a ton of Hollywood stuff, but I do recognize him. He's in Battle Royale, right?
Yes, very famously, Battle Royale. Some listeners may remember him from Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, the David Bowie film.
Oh, yeah.
But listeners who grew up with their teens in the 2000s and remember the channel Spike TV may recall Most Extreme Elimination Challenge. Do you remember that show?
I think I do.
It was like the parody series where they took clips of a Japanese game show, Takeshi's Castle, which
Yes.
which Takeshi Kitano
Oh,
was from,
yes.
and just
Okay.
dubbed it hilariously. So most extreme elimination challenge, pretty hilarious series from the 2000s.
Yes, yes. I do remember that.
Regarding the whitewashing, and then I want to move on. I think they would have been better just completely ignoring it. Trying to like sort of make her Japanese originally was stupid.
Yeah, it just seems it seems odd that they couldn't just do one. They, like a lot of things in this movie, they just can't really commit to it.
No, just pick a lane.
Yeah, just pick.
But
Just
they can.
go full send it, or just like don't.
Mamoru Oshii, the Japanese director of the original Ghost in the Shell film, he spoke out against the whitewashing controversy. He said, surrounding Scarlett Johansson playing Major despite not being Japanese, he gave her his blessing and he said, quote, "I believe having Scarlett play Motoko was the best possible casting for this movie," end quote.
Well, you know why he said it. Shooting a shot.
I don't blame him. Next reason why this wasn't better, we've been sort of drilling into this already, but the story, I don't think the whitewashing was the problem with this movie. That I was I thought it was stupid, but I didn't think it was the biggest problem with it. My biggest problem with it was I think it made the same mistake that a lot of anime adaptations make, and especially video game adaptations make, which is we were talking about it a minute ago. They just did not know how to pick a lane. With this one, it's more or less an original story, but Anton, you mentioned this with a lot of the shots they were trying to recreate. They were trying to shove in as many references to the original 1995 film as they could. And in my opinion, they got caught in this halfway house where they were trying to play it safe. They didn't want to deviate too far from the source material, but they wanted to do an original plot at the same time, which is, I don't think that's ever going to work well.
Yeah, it's never going to work well, especially when we talked about this before, can't really pick a lane. And when you're really shifting the focus so much, certain aspects that made the source material more novel and more interesting just kind of feel tacked on for this film.
Yeah. I'm probably one of the biggest, people that's gonna just so frustrating watching, especially the second time. I don't know why it didn't stand out as much the first time I saw this movie, but this walkthrough or this watch, like man, a lot of the referential, those were the things that took me out the most. Was actually almost any of the like, oh, we're doing this shot or we're doing this sequence from the 95 film, because they just felt so, well, to me they felt so off. And I know this isn't necessarily the story side of it, but they either one a little shoehorned in, like, oh, we got to have the boat moment, right?
Right.
Yep.
Or just, I mean, the biggest problem with a lot of them is they were just like, the pacing was completely off on so many of those. Like, it just was like you're trying to recreate a scene, but man, that sequence was like a half speed in the original movie, because it was a movie designed from a directorial standpoint to like linger, versus, nope, this is a modern Hollywood film. We got to go, move, next sequence, next scene. Like, let's just put the reference in and let's move on. And I do think the story ultimately really hurts on it, because it's just move to the next thing. We're on.
I don't remember the robot geishas in the original one.
I think it's a reference to a like a standalone Complex episode or something like that.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like watching a Ghost in the Shell tribute band.
There's an element of that, yeah. I think that's, but like not just a tribute band, but like we're a tribute band, but we play it in a certain slightly different like style. Like we're a Ghost in the Shell, like we do, I don't know, like what's an example? Like we decided Ghost in the Shell is originally rock, and we decided we're a ska tribute band to Ghost in the Shell or something like that. It's not quite fitting, guys. Like,
it's like in in Step Brothers at the Catalina Wine Mixer, where it's the Billy Joel tribute band, but they're like, no, 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 we only do 80s Billy Joel. I would have just preferred a straight up adaptation of the 1995 film, honestly. Like, just adapt it shot for shot, or just do something completely different. And they do neither.
Yeah.
They tried to do an original story, but at the same time, they did so many of like, hey, remember this really cool shot from the film? We're going to try to recreate it. And most of the time, I think we would all agree, it just looks better when it's animated.
I totally agree. I think that the effects budget, whatever they had, it didn't really impress me. And it's just unfortunate because, there are some instances where I feel like live action, like Batu, like, not bad. But at the end of the day, a lot of the larger scenes, I feel like the effects like were kind of lacking.
For whatever reason, I thought the effects in the first half were better than the second half.
Sure. Yeah.
I think a lot of that can be attributed to the robot tank fight at the end.
In the sense of it feeling less like.
Well, it was really dark. It wasn't as colorful. Like the first, I'd say the first 2/3 of the movie. While I agree with you, Anton, I think the effects were a bit uneven. It is a very visually busy movie. There's a lot of colors. There's a lot of there's a lot going on visually. And then the finale of the movie was just like kind of dark and bleak and not like the rest of the film. I got an Avi Arad quote for you, Anton. In an interview with Collider, this is about the story, Avi Arad said, quote, "We're not doing Puppet Master. It's not Laughing Man. It involves Kuze. The Kuze story. The big thing we're doing here is that we're not necessarily doing an origins backstory, but we are addressing her sense of self and resolving how she defines herself in terms of memories. That's one of the main thrusts of the story, inspired by that episode of Affection in Second Gig. It's bits and pieces of those mixed together." Continued, "Part of the reason we didn't do Puppet Master in this movie was we didn't really feel like we had time to tell that story. And in your first movie, the way characters feel about themselves and the relationship with those people that they care about is usually more than enough story for the movie to handle," end quote. It's like, so they were going to do nothing. That's my takeaway from that.
It's kind of an interesting quote when you think about it in context of the first movie, of the 95 movie, because that's like, an hour less running time? And clearly they did Puppet Master. There's an implicit thing, I feel like, from that quote, which is, we know we need to do this. We know we need to pack this movie with a lot of explanation for people, or they're going to be lost. So we can't have it too complicated.
Right, which is just far less compelling. Sooner or later, they're going to have to pick their lane with one of these adaptations. Like I said, either do a straight adaptation or do something completely original.
So, not for films, but the One Piece Netflix adaptation straight up was like, all right, we're just going full on anime.
It's just a straight adaptation?
It is just, they were just straight up like, we're doing the anime, everything, Snails for Phones, we're doing it. And they did a bang up job.
And that's a series, right? That's not a film.
Right. That's the Netflix original series, live action adaptation, critically very well received. And from the fans, everyone's shocked that it actually was really good. So that's just one example of they went full anime and it went well.
One of the things I didn't like about the story of this film, besides mentioning the prime minister in this film, we have no knowledge of the state that's running things like we do in the previous versions of this story.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly can't claim to be an expert on the original source material, but correct me if I'm wrong, that was a pretty big part of the story in the previous versions.
I think so, or at least it's the relationship between, states, like as I pointed out, like in the 95 movie, like the relationship of states. There's a whole thing about Section 6, Section 9, intergovernment stuff, and then external government interactions. Definitely there's a lot of drama around that. I think in the source material, I think both the adaptation, the manga and the various anime adaptations, I think they float around between government and private sector, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Which again is an interesting thing, but again in this movie, they didn't necessarily pick one or the other. They kind of, it's kind of all there. And because it's all there, it's like nothing gets to be specific enough.
Look, guys, the only storyline that the director chose was let's tell a whole movie about why Scarlett Johansson's white in this movie. Literally what
Rupert
they chose.
Sanders?
Yeah.
You know what else I realized too? It's never really even explained what Section 9 does in this film.
It's not.
They just keep saying, like, she's a weapon. It's like, but to do what? They
Right.
have them fighting, like, who?
To fight the terrorists.
Well, that's they could have something more interesting if they brought in like the fact that she was involved with like counter state stuff and now she fights the counter state actors or something, and it's like this drama of like, wait, these are my people or something like that. But I mean, none of that exists, right?
Nope.
Nope, none of it.
I mean, even to the point that it's like also the ending of this movie, and she's like, I've decided that I want to be, it's important to be in Section 9. It's like, what is Section? What is it important to be a part of? It was like, what? Why?
You hinted at this earlier, Nathan, where everything was rushed. I really felt like I was watching like the abridged version of a much longer film. Like, when you're like younger and were able, I mean, if you buy like the kids version of a book, it's like the abridged version of a book. That's what I felt with this. I rewatched this twice for this podcast. It's like both times it was just like, this seems just like a shorter version of a much longer, more complete movie, like sort of the opposite of a director's cut.
I know what you mean, Pat. It almost feels like it's not quite the light novel movie adaptation. It's kind of a few steps back in terms of maybe almost the Scholastic Book Fair, more pictures than words adaptation.
Yeah, there's a lot of great pictures in this film. I'll give it that. But Rupert Sanders, I don't think he was the best choice for this.
No.
You have to wonder, like, what if someone like Spielberg had made this?
I mean, it still makes me wish that James Cameron would do a sequel to Battle Angel.
100%. But don't worry, we're getting Avatar 4, 5, 6, and 7.
And don't worry, we're going to have Rupert Sanders ruining The Crow.
Ugh. Did you look at his resume?
I have, and it's not a lot.
It's not a lot.
No. So he had directed Snow White and the Huntsman before this, which I don't believe that I've seen. And then he did a lot of commercials. I can definitely see the commercial thing because a lot of this movie is shot like a commercial.
Yeah, there are a lot of scenes that feel very Beats by Dre.
That's accurate. I don't know how, but it is. I do feel for him a little bit. He apparently really wanted to make this. He even turned down an offer to direct one of the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels to do this. So, hats off to him for at least trying. You know who would have been a better choice, Anton?
Who?
Just a couple of ideas I have for you. Joseph Kosinski, or dare I even say Ridley Scott?
I would love to see Ridley Scott, just because we've talked about this before. It's either the high highs or the low lows with him.
Right. The wild inconsistency of Ridley Scott. There's a lot of visual elements that just work in animation that don't work here. And that's the whole thing. We've been talking about this throughout this episode, though. Like, just ripping off entire shots from the animated film, I don't think it's a good idea. Just try to do your own thing. There's nothing wrong with homages, but they were lifting almost entire sequences from the original film, like the robot tank battle.
Yeah, but they also were like, I mean, for me, I feel like the biggest one besides I think Anton said about the jump off the skyscraper is the sequence where it was clear they really wanted the amazing tense sequence of the guy whose like brain is hacked and running through like the alleyways and the fight in the water, right? Like this was like, we have to have this. Like,
yes,
it's clearly that existed because they were like, we need to have this, not because this fits for our movie or our plot. It's like, no, we wrote this in because we have to have this sequence because it's like the best sequence from the original, the 95 film. It doesn't matter whether it fits or makes sense in the context of the plot. It's just, we have to have it because that's a great part of it. Right. And it's just like, okay, cool. You know what? If you want to take your time and you want to roll with that sequence like it was in the original film, I'm willing to entertain it. But I'm pretty sure if you watch those sequences side by side, if you started rolling from when they both start, you're going to be like, the 2017 movie's like done in like 2 minutes. For a sequence that was like 5-10 minutes or something in the original film, it just never gives time. That's why it's like a tribute band or like an homage. Like it's not even an homage. It's an homage is you have a quick thing and you get to just be like, that was cool. It's like, again, it's a picking the lane issue. Like you do an homage, it's over in 15 seconds, right? You do like a comparative adaptation and capture what was like visually interesting and distinct about the original movie. You got to commit, right? But you're not committing. You want to have cake and eat it too. You want to move at a fast clip and kind of like have these sequences, but you want to do it in like lose the timing of it. And it's clear, you can see from a directing standpoint, it just deflated from a sequence. That one's the biggest one that I like to point to because that sequence with the running through the alleyway, the shots of like the airplane up above, the big panoramic of the city and the water, like these are extremely tense sequences, right? Because they're slow, you're not following exactly, like you're like getting into the character that's being hunted by the major, like all of this, but you have no time for that because it's like over. And it's just a little bit, it's like it's that hard bit of like, man, it's a really bad choice. It's just sticks out so much for me.
It's well said.
I did my soapbox.
No, I agree with everything you're saying. I think they really just didn't know how to pick a lane. I liked the production design. I'm trying to think of positives about the film. I really did like the production design. I got a very serious like vaporwave aesthetic from a lot of things. They did put a lot of thought into that.
You're right. I mean, it does really look like they said, make a 2017 version of Ghost in the Shell and put it through an AI machine.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
I think I mentioned before, just visually, to me, it's so interesting how 2017 cyberpunk it is, right? With good and bad with that. I remembered, I looked up after I watched the movie, looked up a screen, like a trailer for Cyberpunk 2077, the video game. And the trailer opened with a city shot that I was like, I feel this is a still from the movie that I just watched, which is cool that they're on point for that visual design for that time. It's definitely kind of pulling from what is in the space around the idea of making a cyberpunk thing.
There was a much better release in 2017 for sci-fi that was able to take a lot of homages from the source material, but also use those elements to move the plot forward in a really seamless way. And I loved Blade Runner 2049.
Was that 2017?
Yes.
It was 2017. Man, because that's what I was thinking about this while I was watching this movie, was I was thinking about Blade Runner 2049, and did that feel more closer in relationship to Ghost in the Shell 1995 than this film?
Oh, 1,000,000%. Versus this film, which was very on the nose of, my name is Major, I have a question, what is my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, we get it. This is what you're looking for.
Kind of like the Keymaker in Matrix Reloaded. Sort of. I'm with you on Blade Runner 2049, 2047. Whatever it is, I always struggle with that. Blade Runner 2.
Part 2.
Yeah, Part 2, because it's directed by Denis Villeneuve. I liked the score.
Yeah, I like the score. Do you guys remember the score from the original?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot more chanting.
Yeah, the original has a strange score. Interestingly, the official soundtrack has never been released from this film. It's pretty weird.
I read your note on that. I was like, that's really like a Clint Mansell soundtrack didn't surface?
Then you're telling me this soundtrack could still be in the Paramount database, like some sort of Ghost in the Machine?
Yes, although I think it's Paramount Plus at this point, buddy. I was pretty impressed to hear. So the opening credits, the shelling sequence, there's some green screen in there, but it was mostly done with practical effects. Scarlett Johansson's body was used as a model for the cybernetic shell. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I think, as something that, no surprise that they would do that as the like the opening, right? They're going to want to really make that callback. I would say that's probably the one that felt the least like, or the most like, okay, this is like a new take on this, right? You know, we're still in reference to like the 1995 film, and I would say it would be maybe the most, connected. You know, you could start with that and then start moving away. You know what I mean? And I could feel really good about that sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I think it did what it needed to, with also losing maybe some of the stuff from the 95 film that makes it a little like, a little graphic, while still keeping the idea behind it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I mentioned this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I have here the history of Hollywood adapting anime.
Okay.
Not much, but we're going to go through it. Here's the examples prior to 2017. So we had 3 low-budget direct-to-video releases in the 90s. The Guyver, Dark Hero, and Fist of the North Star. I'm not familiar with any of these. I've not seen them.
Is the Guyver related to like MacGyver, you think?
No,
I don't know.
that's funny. Guyver is a sci-fi anime where he gets an exoskeleton armor suit and fights bad guys.
I feel an anime adaptation of MacGyver would be really good. Oh my gosh, the low budget Guyver is Mark Hamill.
I've never seen it, but so next up there's a Yu-Gi-Oh movie from 2004, which did not make a profit. I feel like I've seen it, but I don't remember it.
A live action Yu-Gi-Oh movie?
I think it was animated.
I was gonna say it was the animated film.
Yeah.
Oh.
Speed Racer in 2008, which completely bombed. Now, it has a bit of a cult following, but again, still a box office bomb. We have Dragon Ball Evolution in 2009, which did not make much money and is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's a war crime called the United Nations. We have Astro Boy, which is an animated movie also released in 2009 and also bombed.
Ugh, that was a bummer.
We have Spike Lee's version of Old Boy, which came out in 2013, which is a horrible movie that also bombed. 2014, we saw some success. We had Edge of Tomorrow, starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, which is a great movie. This gets in on a technicality. I believe we talked about this on the Death Note episode. It is an adaptation of a Japanese novel, not a straight anime. But I wanted to put it on the list because it's a positive. It's a great movie.
It's also a great positive that shows that, it's an interesting case study, because it's also the one on this list that's probably the most removed from its source material. Not in a bad, and to its credit, right? It was able to take the small bits that it needed to and leave behind being an adaptation. You know what I mean? Like in terms of like, let's drop the name, let's drop most, it's also not trying to adapt something that really was in anyone's mind, especially in the West. But yeah, definitely worth noting.
Couple years after this film came out, I'm talking about Ghost in the Shell, we got Alita Battle Angel, which we've talked about. That did pretty well financially, and it was very well received critically. Pretty good movie, but that's an exception. And then last year, 2023, we got Knights of the Zodiac, which completely flopped. I haven't seen that one, but it is on our list, so we're going to have to get around to it at some point.
Yeah, I remember mentioning that in an earlier episode. We'll talk about it more. I actually don't think it was bad.
I'll see it. I'm looking forward to it. But that's it. Those are your examples for anime adaptations. And, putting this list together and, doing a bit of analysis, if you're hoping for more anime adaptations, don't. Because we just ran through it with a couple of notable exceptions. They don't make money.
Right.
The only exception to that is the fact that we've seen a lot of now, maybe not box office draw, but streaming has definitely benefited from having the adaptations for One Piece. Anime has been very successful on Netflix, with even more adaptations being slated because of the success of the One Piece anime adaptation. But for film, it's way too hard for big studios to justify trying to adapt anime, just because you're right, Pat. It's just not a great track record.
When you really think about it, it shouldn't be, because probably obvious, and all of us realize it. Think about it. Most successful anime that are people like and are very popular, they are series. So you're automatically placing a huge burden on yourself by trying to take a series of 20, 30, 40, whatever episodes and try to boil it down into a 90-minute film or a 2-hour film. That's ultimately what we felt did in Death Note, right? It's like you're trying to take this 30 whatever episode series and you're trying to put it into a 90-minute film. Like, what are the chances that's going to be successful?
Absolutely. It's definitely an interesting choice, right? I mean, films are, on the one hand, I mean, it is interesting, and I think to Anton's point, the TV revolution, if you will, and the movement of so much to streaming and television series over films definitely opens up what might be the thing to crack it, right? It could be that ultimately movie is just not the place for it, right?
Yeah.
For that reason, and that now that TV exists in a way that's like more able to do those things. I mean, that's why you're seeing maybe more experiments there. Certainly with, as Anton mentioned, the One Piece, as well as the not as successful, but certainly they were trying something, Cowboy Bebop adaptation.
Look, I could totally see like a big producer in Hollywood. He has a cigar in his hand.
I'm a big Hollywood producer.
He's looking at the director across the table and saying, all right, we'll give you one more shot at anime.
They keep getting that one more shot.
I hope they keep trying, but I don't think you're going to see a ton of them.
Well, I was just peeking because you mentioned it. The Avi Arad is slated to help production on a Naruto movie?
That's going to be terrible.
Yeah, I think Naruto. Yeah.
Isn't that like hundreds of episodes?
A Naruto movie.
Yep, it is. It is.
Yeah, it's like, so how adapt
That's
what?
right.
Like one episode, one season? Like, how's that going to work?
No, they're going to try to condense the entirety of it into 90 minutes. Come on. No, they could plan for like we're gonna expect that this is going to be a multi-movie thing. I mean, everybody loves a multi-film franchise. Come on.
I already know we're going to have to see it because it's going to inevitably end up on our list.
Well, if it gets made, I mean, it's still probably
true
enough that it's
That's one I hope it doesn't. Last reason why this wasn't better, I don't think we need to spend much time talking about the acting in this film because there's not a lot of it.
There really is not.
I was completely unimpressed by the acting in here. This might as well have been a CGI film with the complete lack of emotion. Completely flat, monotone. I understand they're all cybernetically enhanced beings. That may work in anime form. I don't think it works well in live action. This is a very unremarkable Scarlett Johansson performance, and none of the supporting cast impressed me in any way whatsoever.
It didn't help, too, that there was just so much exposition in the film that doubling down with just the very monotone voice with heavily layered exposition, it made it feel it felt like it dragged in a lot of scenes because of just how flat it felt.
Yeah. Sure. I would say the only one that I liked was Bato's actor because he seemed to be the only one kind of having much of a character.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. He was the only one with a personality. He liked to feed dogs.
Right.
They had some chemistry together, limited.
Yeah.
The villain in this film is absolutely terrible. What's his name? Cutter?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
Not interesting at all.
No, not at all.
He's of course, he ends up being the real villain. The perceived villain is this guy Kuze, played by Michael Pitt, who I recognize from Boardwalk Empire. Just not a fan. Just it doesn't have a ton to do. He could have been an interesting character, I thought, but I don't know. It just felt like they didn't have a lot of money for the cast.
Well, they also didn't. I mean, they probably intentionally were like, okay, we're not going to spend too much time on the rest of this cast because we got ScarJo, so let's make the biggest use of her. In their defense, they're working with the best that they got, but it also puts so much weight on her. I guess like Dr. Ule is like kind of interesting, sort of. I thought there was kind of an interesting thing of maybe like a sort of Frankenstein's monster thing going on there. Is Dr. Ule too deep in it to see like the certain stuff? This goes kind of maybe back to the plot side of things, but ultimately, again, that sort of all kind of gets swept away, or just it's the plot was stripped, was just going too many different directions that it didn't feel like it could really track on something.
No. Anton, any thoughts on the cast?
Well, I mean, I know what I was reminded of when we saw Michael Pitt's character. It was, well, they couldn't afford Jared Leto.
Oh, that's good. You're right. They couldn't afford him. He was an Oscar winner at that point.
Yeah.
Although Juliette Binoche was an Oscar winner, they afforded her.
What did Jared Leto win an Oscar for? Oh,
Dallas Buyers Club.
Yep.
I think if the Academy could take that one back, they would.
oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just we can see that the cast itself was just not really didn't really bring out their strengths, and the source material ended up probably overshadowing the even for me, I feel like I compared it so much to the original source material that I think it did give me a bit of a biased view going into it, and that included my critical view of the acting.
Yeah, you can't help it, especially if you've seen the original, you can't help it, right? You're going to have a little bit of a bias. And it's very closely related to the performances, but I can't even think of a single memorable line of dialogue from this film. And I'm usually pretty good at remembering lines from films. I couldn't think of one.
Well, and that goes to also, though, I don't remember anything stand out as, oh my gosh, that was like so bad either.
No, it's just very unmemorable.
Fine.
Well, it sounds like we can wrap this up.
Sure.
And we now we can talk about whether or not we liked it. I feel like we haven't talked about many positives so far. Nathan, you're the guest. Would you like to go first?
Just to confirm, this is like ending in our rating on it as well.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have to go first. We just always offer the guest.
I'll go first. So did I like the movie? Similar to when I saw it in theaters in 2017, despite I think some of the kind of the discourse we've had around it in this episode, I didn't leave Ghost in the Shell particularly like oh my gosh, that was like hard to like get through. And similarly, when I saw it in theaters, I even remembered seeing it in theaters and going like, oh, I guess that wasn't too bad. And it was always stuck in my mind as being like, that was fine. And I think this more recent viewing reinforced that it was fine. I think this time I did, especially because I watched the 95 movie like a week before watching this one. Some of those homages really kind of, or not homages, but trying to pull those sequences and do them stood out a lot more. But ultimately, I think that it's just such a okay movie. Like it's just very okay. I wasn't totally offended. I didn't think it was really goofy. I think in some ways, and Pat, I know I mentioned this, I think in our kind of pre-talk, in some ways I maybe kind of would like it to have been worse because there'd be something kind of maybe a little bit more interesting or fun, or I could almost like dish on it, like, or we could like kind of pick it apart a little bit more and be like, what were they thinking? But here there was enough money and enough like kind of consideration to things that it wasn't like completely like offensive or like, oh, this I can't, like, I never, despite some of my complaints about the story, I never felt like I was lost. I never felt like it was completely like I don't understand what's going on or what's happening. And all of that leads to a very, in my opinion, like kind of, again, very fine movie. It's not a movie I'm interested in probably ever watching again. It's not something I'm going to go out of my way to recommend, but I wouldn't be like, oh, never watch that movie. It's terrible. I wish there was more to say about it other than it was like, I guess it was a Ghost in the Shell Hollywood adaptation that was very fine. Ultimately, I would give it probably a C rating. C for average.
All right. Yeah, that's better than I expected, to be honest.
Yeah, agreed.
Anton, I will go next, if you don't mind.
Please.
I never expected this film to be good, and it was not. But I don't think it's horrible. I am very intrigued by what Nathan said, where he said he almost wishes it was worse because there would be more to pick apart. I kind of want to piggyback on that because I agree. It doesn't do anything particularly horribly. Visually, it's pretty cool. While it's derivative of the source material at the same time, they were ripping off shots from the original film. Very cool shots, obviously. I don't know if they're as cool in live action. The story was, again, derivative of the source material. It wasn't completely original. It wasn't a straight adaptation. It was sort of somewhere in between. So, yeah, I wasn't lost by the plot. I understood the story they were trying to tell. I think it relied on a lot of exposition. I don't think any of the acting was good. None of it was horrible. None of it was offensive. There was some pretty confusing choices, though, like making the chief the only character to speak Japanese. They were constantly reminding you that this was a Japanese sourced film, but this film wasn't Japanese, even though we had some of the cast who were. It's paced okay, but the story felt incomplete. It could have been longer. I like the score. I like the production design. It's a very unmemorable Scarlett Johansson performance. It seems like they just put all the money into the visuals and really not much else. It's so astoundingly mediocre that I almost find it offensive. Almost. Because, like I said, it doesn't do anything horrible. It just does everything like slightly below average. I can't really recommend it because if someone asked me, like, hey, should I watch the live action Ghost in the Shell film? I would tell them no, just watch the original or Standalone Complex or literally anything else in the franchise. Like, there's really no point in watching this unless you're really into the franchise and you're just curious.
Hmm.
So, I'm a little conflicted on how to rate it because I was originally going to give it somewhere in the C territory, but a lot of things I rate in the C territory I actually kind of like and I would watch again. I would never watch this again.
Hmm.
So I think I want to go D plus.
Okay.
I did not like this film. I didn't like it when I saw it in theaters. I didn't like it when I rewatched it. I didn't like it when I had to slow down and compare the scenes that were from the original 95 film and compare it to how they reshot in this film. And the more that I thought about that, the more that I compared it to the original source material, I had to really just do a few mental gymnastics in my mind of what even is this film. And it's just, again, this is Hollywood's attempt at taking a very beloved franchise and making it more accessible to the common denominator. And how do you do that? You water it down a bit. You put together some marketing materials that really push forward this big Hollywood star that a lot of people are going to recognize and make the film more palatable. And for hardcore fans or fans that can really critically look at the film, it's of course going to be a disappointment. But one of the positives that you do get from that is you do open up an opportunity for fans who may have not watched anime to get their feet wet and be introduced to a run-of-the-mill sci-fi film with a lot of Japanese aesthetics that calls back to original source material, where if you find yourself interested because of the pretty good fight choreography, really interesting ideas that you can absorb because it doesn't really dive too deep into the actual philosophical conversations from the original source material, then I feel like it did a pretty good job of being able to introduce that wider audience to what is anime. And I see that as kind of the mindset of producers going into this. As a film by itself, just not that enjoyable. Of course, it's very flat. Of course, it really takes what could have been a really great concept, right? Amazing anime source material, and let's put a big budget behind it. But instead, it just really is just more of a vehicle to ease people into anime. And all I'm saying is, Hollywood, let's just full send it. Let's just, whenever the next one is, if it's going to be Naruto, please full send it.
100%.
But for this film, I'm not going to watch it again. And I think that it's not an F, but for me, a D minus.
Pretty wide range of scores here. I'm liking it. Great way to start off season 5, Anton.
Oh yeah, that is a juicy one to jump off of.
It's so delightfully unmemorable.
Which is kind of interesting that we have, because I think we all agree on that, but it's interesting how we all rate what unmemorable means.
Yeah. I understand everyone's scores. I mean, obviously I understand mine because I gave it, but I get the C, I get the C, I get the D minus. Anton, if you had given this an F, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. It's just there's no reason to ever watch this.
But hey, let's have some hope. Maybe Naruto live action's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, sure. Maybe. Kind of doubt it, but well, that's it for Ghost in the Shell. Nathan, once again, it has been a pleasure. You're now a veteran, and we look forward to having you back many more times.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan, anime expert.
That's me. I'm
anime-ish.
Shirt coming soon.
All right. Well, that is it for the season premiere. Anton, what do we got next? Is it Time Machine?
Next film, I believe, is the Batman.
Oh, I think I messed that up. I think it's Time Machine.
Oh, okay. Then we are going to we're going to 1960, folks.
Yeah, 1960, the original Time Machine adaptation. Nathan, I know you're a fan.
Yep, I have seen that movie for sure. Just it's I have it alongside my copy of The English Patient.
Outstanding. All right. Well, we will see you next week on Why Wasn't It Better when we talk about the Time Machine. See you then. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better. If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.